From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
This program is being sponsored by the European Division at the Library of Congress and the Hebrew language table at the Library of Congress. I would like to thank at LC Grant Harris, Erica Spencer, Audrey Fisher, and Galina Tevorovsky. Today we'll hear two very different approaches to Holocaust stories. Our Crime Was Being Jewish contains memoirs of 358 Holocaust survivors, and Auschwitz number 34207 tells the story of one, Joe Rubenstein. Our panel will be moderated by Michlean Amir, who's reference coordinator of the Holocaust Survivors and Victims Center at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And as part of her job, she's always helping researchers, and she's always throwing me speakers, and she says, Gail, you gotta have this speaker. So that's how our two wonderful speakers came to us today. Michlean's gonna be moderating. Questions and answers will follow at the very end. Thank you. Michlean.
Well, thank you all for coming. For me, it's an honor and a privilege to be here and moderate two authors who are, I think, very, very special. And I'm sure you will feel the same at the end of this presentation. I thank Gail for inviting me to be part of this event, which is, in a way, a commemoration of Kristallnacht, which happened November 9th and 10th, 1938. Just want to say a few words about that. Kristallnacht is not a word that Holocaust survivors like to use for this event because it has a little positive connotation. You know, crystal is beautiful. So they prefer to call it the Night of Broken Glass. The, I guess, excuse for that evening, for that night, was the fact that a young man by the name of Herschel Greenspan, who was 17 years old, was very, very frustrated because in 1938, towards the end of 1938, many German Jewish people who were of Polish descent were suddenly sent back to Poland. Some of these people were in Germany from 1900 and even before. Herschel Greenspan's parents were there from 1911, and he was so upset that they were sent to Zbaszyn, which was a town on the border of Poland and Germany. So they were in a camp in Poland and had nowhere to go. They had lost all their contacts in Poland, and so were many other people. So he went to the German embassy in Paris and was very frustrated talking to Ernest von Brandt, who was an employee at the embassy there, and finally, he just took out his gun and shot him. And that was the excuse for everything that happened that night. It was encouraged by two well-known Nazis, Heydrich and Goebbels. And that evening, 267 synagogues in Germany, Austria, and in the Protectorate were burnt down, as were 7,500 Jewish businesses, many Jewish cemeteries, Jewish schools, and Jewish homes. So it was really the beginning of what we now call the Holocaust. And I think this presentation is very, very appropriate to remember that horrendous day. So I have to admit that I'm not an objective presenter here. I have known the authors, Tony, for a very, very long time, and his books for a long time. I know he's an excellent author, and so is this book. I like to always remember the moment when I saw President Clinton going on vacation to Martha's Vineyard with Tony's book on the burning of Washington in his hand so the world could see it, and that was fantastic publicity. And of course, his book on the assassination of President Lincoln is also very famous, as are his other 10 or 11 books. And so the years that I've known him, I won't even tell you because it's so many. I haven't known Nancy as many years, but I feel very close to her because we've worked both with Tony and with Nancy on their research, actually from the very beginning when they just started thinking about writing their books. I think Tony was not sure exactly what he wanted to do immediately, and I'm sure you'll hear that a little later, but he knew that it was time for him to write a book on the Holocaust. And Nancy was fortunate, I think, as was Joe Rubenstein, that they met, and eventually the book has been written and it is here available and of information to everyone around the world. And I know Nancy is in contact with people all over the world because of the book. So our work together was at the Holocaust Museum, where I have been for 16 years in working in reference, now more specifically on the fate of individuals. And therefore, Joe Rubenstein Story was exactly in my area of research, and we did find all kinds of information on him during the war, how he moved from camp to camp and how he came to the United States and so forth. And when Tony eventually decided that he wanted to look into oral histories, we worked together to see which ones and how he would access them. The museum has an enormous resource for Holocaust studies. Not only does the museum have its own Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies, where there are scholars, but there are also interns and fellows at the museum all the time from all around the world. And they work on so many different areas. You know, we know that the Holocaust is the most documented event in human history. So the documentation is enormous. We have in the library over 100,000 books. These books are in every language that you can imagine. Any book that's been written on any aspect of the Holocaust, the museum tries to get. And so there are books in Chinese and in Japanese, in languages that you would not imagine. And there are 100 million pages of archival information. The museum has been collecting this for over 21 years. That's how long the museum has been open, but many years before that, when it was just an idea, information started to be collected. So that, and then there are 100,000 photographs and 10,000 or more interviews. So for all these scholars, when they come to research, they need help to navigate through this wealth of information. And that's what we do when we help them in doing the reference work. A lot of the information is available on the website, but of course, much has not been digitized yet. It is, I think, the idea that eventually this will happen, but it'll be a long time because those of you who've been to the museum, to the permanent exhibit, everything that's there is about 5% of what the museum has. The rest, the 95%, is kept in a state-of-the-art area where temperature, pressure, and humidity are very, very carefully controlled. And we are building a new structure just for that. So my interaction with these two authors has been very interesting, and to see how the process evolved so that there's a book is always amazing to me, because sometimes it's an idea in someone's mind and it takes 5 or sometimes even 10 years to see the product and be able to actually read it. I think that both Nancy and Tony had in mind the words of Elie Wiesel, who warned that only those who were there can write about the Holocaust. And that's why I think they went to the horse's mouth, so to speak, to those survivors who were interviewed, or the survivor who was alive. And I think they're also trying to make sure that these memories are there for us to remember, because Elie Wiesel also said that if we forget them, we'll cause them to have a second death. And unfortunately, that is true. The only thing that we have really from those who were there are the memoirs and the oral histories of those who survived. So they used raw testimonies. And for Our Crime Was Being Jewish, Tony combed through the museum's oral history interviews and listened to, as you heard, 358 of them, and pulled out of them some of the most powerful and poignant testimonies. Symbolically, that book is like the chaos of the Holocaust. There's no arrangement. It's not arranged by geographical place or in any other way, not chronologically or by subject. And there's no index, because I think the author felt that if he indexed the 358 names, one would think that these were all of them, but all the others, especially the victims, would not have been on the list. And those evil acts that were perpetrated by the Nazis are so coldly described in the passages that Tony pulled out that one is left holding your breath in disbelief. I think this book will be a very useful resource for teachers of all ages, because the information is right there, and they will not have to comb through all these interviews as Tony had to. And it is really excellent documentation of those crimes. Nancy Geise, on the other hand, focused on one person, and she interviewed him masterfully. He was very reluctant at first, actually, you will hear from Nancy, did not want to talk. I think it just was too painful for him to remember. But after several years, possibly because of his guilt that he was the only one that survived, he felt that he needed to talk to be the one who will record what happened to his family, to everyone in his family. His fortune was that he was a very positive thinking person, because even in the total darkness of the war, he was able to see some rays of light. And he was able to make a new and wonderful life in the United States for himself and his family, and you will hear more about it very soon. Nancy's book is very readable. She divided it into sections, and they're very accessible. She provides historical background to events described by Auschwitz prisoner number 34201, and she included maps, documents, photographs, and a timeline so that one could read it and really get the background, not just of what happened to Joe, but what was happening during the war at that time. The reviews of both books have been excellent, and you might hear more about that. And I think we're really very fortunate to have Anthony Pitch and Nancy Geise talk about the issues of writing the Holocaust. So I invite Tony to come up here, and I have some questions for you so that we'll hear how this process of writing went on. My first question is, what led you to decide, after all the books that you wrote, that you needed to write a book about the Holocaust?
It's a good question. Look, I must at the beginning apologize. I had a stroke, and my short-term memory is not what it used to be. In fact, I recently forgot what I was talking about. I hope it doesn't happen today. Why did I choose the Holocaust? I had always been attracted by subjects that were epic, true, and sad. I don't know why, but that's a fact of life. And that's why I wrote about Vietnam, a longest held prisoner, the burning of the White House and the Capitol by the British, Lincoln's assassination. They all fit that mold. And then I thought, well, the Holocaust is in that mold also. And the problem is, my daughter said to me, don't touch it. It's been overdone. It's been written by everybody. There's nothing new you can say. I accepted that, and I put it aside. And then one day I was looking at YouTube, and I saw Dieudonné Mbala. He is a Frenchman whose father was Cameroonian and his mother was French. He lives in France. And this is the ranking anti-Semite in Europe today, Dieudonné Mbala. He has an enormous following, and he ridicules the Holocaust. He has a skit called Show Ananas. Shoah, you know, ananas is pineapple in French. And he plays with the pineapple while he's ridiculing the Holocaust. And he's making a fortune, and he's getting followers like nobody's business. It so infuriated me that I had to reply to him. And the best method I could do was by getting the Holocaust survivors themselves to tell him what they went through, what they endured. And that's why I chose this book. I wrote the preface, that's all. I let them speak for themselves. I excerpted brief amounts that they could describe the range of atrocities. And it's one of those things that all Holocaust survivors have, the urge to recall it for a world too naive to believe. That appears again and again, and these are their statements, not mine. It's their wisdom.
Right, so my next question is, although you partially answered it, but how is writing this book different from writing about Lincoln or about the White House? Writing it, how is that different?
It's different in this respect. I had to insert myself into my other books, and I did research from Harvard right down to Alabama. Any document I could get hold of. There were state historical societies all over the place. There's no end to the research. This one was quite easy for me because I let the people speak for themselves. My only insertion of myself was to edit, because English was not the mother tongue of many of these people. In fact, I probably went through much more than 1,000 of these interviews, and some of them were, the English was not quite good enough even for editing, and so I chose those who would show the range of atrocities, and it was rather like being at an operation. I can stand blood, the sight of it. I can watch these things on TV, it doesn't matter. Many people have said to me, how did you manage it? It's so frightening. But you can't write about the Holocaust unless you describe how it was.
So that leads me to the next question, which again you partially answered. Was it emotionally difficult for you to deal with these interviews day in and day during the night when you were reading them so thoroughly? Did it leave an effect on you the next day or for a long period?
Strangely, it didn't. It should have, but it didn't. I don't know why. It was like when I visited Auschwitz. It was all scrubbed and clean. You couldn't smell it. You couldn't see the people suffering, skeletons walking around. It was all scrubbed and clean. And that's the effect that this had on me. Many people expressed surprise. They said, how did you get through it? And I don't know, but that's an individual thing. It really didn't affect me, but I know that if you read this book, you probably may not be able to finish it. It's so horrific. And this is my reply to Dieudonné and Balambala. They spoke and they answered him.
Well, I think that Michael Berenbaum gave you a wonderful foreword for the book, and you were fortunate to have him, and we were fortunate because he added to your foreword. So one more question I have, and that is, did you have any difficulties getting a publisher? I constantly hear it from writers about the Holocaust, that it's impossible to get a publisher. Can you tell us about the process of getting a publisher?
I wish I could answer that. They are a curse. I don't know the secret to it, but I had no problem in this one because my agent was Jewish, and he took it like that, and he placed it very quickly. It was all done in a couple of weeks. Normally, J.K. Rowling had multiple rejections before Harry Potter was accepted. So it's really one person's opinion. Jonathan Living Seagull, same thing. And you can name all these bestsellers. It's really one lousy person in the publishing business.
So here we're quite limited on time. I just wanted to see if there was anything that you wanted to add to the questions, any answer, any description. You're welcome to do it, and then we'll invite Nancy to come up.
I really don't have any. I'd rather respond to questions, but what you have coming up now is marvelous. Nancy is a wonderful speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony, very much. Nancy, we're anxiously waiting to hear about the story of Joe Rubenstein, and if you could respond to these questions as well as you talk, that would be great.
Perfect. Wow, thank you so much. I just first have to say thank you, Gail. Thank you, Michlean. I'm so honored to be here with Anthony Pitch. His book is marvelous, and Anthony, I just want to say thank you on behalf of future generations. What you've done is a tremendous gift, so thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here. I came in from Topeka, Kansas to be here. I think half the state of Kansas knows that I'm here. And the other part, I'm making sure they do know. But I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be at the Library of Congress. It truly is one of the greatest honors of my life. To share with you a little bit about a truly remarkable man who survived, can you hear me okay? Who survived really everything that the Nazis tried to do to the Jews, with the exception of killing him, which they nearly did. So I'll try to answer some of the questions and give you a little bit of background on Joe and how I met him. Because Joe was raised in a town called Radom, Poland. He was born in 1920, and when he was 5 years old, his father passed away, and life got very, very difficult at that point for his family. His mother was widowed, raising 5 children. And all the kids were just incredible kids. They all did everything they could to help keep food on the table. When Joe was 12 years old, he would go from school to then working in a lumber yard to, after that, learning to make shoes at night. So they were just really hardworking, loving family. And when the Nazis invaded, of course, they moved all the Jewish people. They were about, I've heard estimates anywhere from 30,000 people moved into the 2 ghetto areas of Radom, and Joe and his family were among them. I first met Joe in 2007. It was rather unusual, and I'm a very unlikely person to be standing here. I'm not Jewish. I'm certainly not a Holocaust scholar. If you told me a few years ago that I would be writing this story, I would have told you, you're crazy. That's not possible. Certainly not possible to be here. But I was working at a retirement community in Fort Collins, Colorado, and Joe and his wife were 2 of our first residents that moved in. And one of my co-workers told me that Joe was a Holocaust survivor. And so I asked him, a while later I saw a little portion of his tattoo sticking out from under his arm. He's got a tattoo that runs the length of his forearm, and he keeps it covered always. But I saw a portion of it, asked him about it, and he said, it's from Auschwitz. And I said, Joe, our daughter is majoring in history. Would it be okay if she interviewed you for one of her classes? And Joe said, never. I will never talk about it. I didn't realize then that in over 70 years he had never shared his story. Even his family knew just bits and pieces. It was so incredibly painful for him. That was in 2007. And then I moved with my husband to Topeka, Kansas, but Joe and I remained really close. He's just a phenomenal man. He is the most joy-filled man I've ever known. And so we remained close, and I came back for a visit 5 years after I first asked Joe if I could write or if my daughter could interview him. And I was back for a visit. I ran into Joe, and literally out of the blue, he said, Nancy, I'd like to tell you my story. So I dropped everything. I went over to his house, and I had no idea what it was I would be writing or hearing. I thought maybe it would be a little keepsake for his family. But as soon as he started talking, I knew that this was a story the world was going to want to hear. And it has proved to be the case. I'm hearing from people all over the world about the impact Joe's story is having on them. People are telling me that if Joe overcame everything they did, or that he did, and did so with joy, that they can deal with whatever they're dealing with. I heard from somebody from New Zealand a couple weeks ago. A Polish or a German police officer contacted me a couple weeks ago and told me that because of Joe's story, it's changed his life, and he is vowing that it never happen again. And I love that. So as Joe began to talk, he told me that he wanted to get it all out once and for all. A to Z, he told me, A to Z, I'm going to tell you everything. And he began with extraordinary detail. Do you all remember the movie The Titanic, the fictional version? And they asked the very elderly Rose at the very beginning, tell us anything you can remember. They don't think she'll remember anything. And she says, I could still smell the fresh paint. That was the detail that Joe started telling me his story. He began like this. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and someone was pounding at my door. And I knew that someone pounding at my door at 4 o'clock in the morning could only mean trouble, and I didn't want trouble. We had had so much trouble since the Nazis had invaded. I wanted to go back to bed. I wanted to pretend none of it was happening. But as the oldest male in the house, I knew it was up to me now to handle what was on the other side of that door. So I walked across the floor, and my hand was trembling as I reached for it. And as I opened the door, 2 German soldiers were standing there with machine guns in hand, ordering me to come with them. And I told them, but I haven't done anything wrong. And they said, you come with me. But I need to say goodbye to my family. I need to change my clothes. They said, you have everything you need. And I looked down at my bare feet, my shorts, and my t-shirt. And I thought, everything I need. And then they walked me outside into the bitterly cold air, and they put me on an open air truck with no protection, where I would be huddled with strangers. Several would die. And that's the detail that Joe started telling me the story. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, all I need to do is write down his words, and Joe, here's your story. And then a really strange thing happened. So he went from that detail, and he said, and then they took me to Auschwitz. And while I was there, I worked in a coal mine. And then after that, after the war, I went to New York. And I have jokingly said I had A and I had Z, which Joe said he was going to tell me A to Z, but I had nothing in between. And my next book is surely going to be called Getting to Z. Because I spent the next almost 3 years trying to figure out what happened in between, because it was so incredibly painful for Joe to share this. 70 years he had tried not to talk about it. Until he shared his story with me, he never told anyone what he did to survive at Auschwitz. His job was moving the bodies of the dead from the gas chamber to the open pits, pushing them in a wooden handcart, all the while praying for the souls of those he pushed and praying that he wouldn't find his family among those dead. And until he shared his story with me, he never told anyone, that while at Auschwitz he had been repeatedly sexually assaulted. 70 plus years he kept that hidden and tight and closed, and that to me is also one of the miracles of this story. Joe was so incredibly worried about his family learning about this. His grandkids, they're adults now, but one of them said to him afterwards, Grandpa, I've never loved you more. And that was one of the greatest blessings anyone could give to their grandfather, someone who felt that if anyone knew, they may not love him. And it's such an important lesson for all of us. So Joe was taken to Auschwitz. He arrived, and I thankfully know this because of the Holocaust Museum, April 30th, 1942. He was at Auschwitz over 2 years proper, before being taken to several other camps, Buchenwald, Ohrdorf, and finally, right before the end of the war, Theresienstadt. Just before the end of the war, Joe and as the Soviet army was approaching, that camp was in chaos. The Red Cross was coming in, the Soviets were advancing, and Joe looked out one day and he saw the Nazi guards pulling civilian clothes over their uniforms. And Joe said to the man next to him, "What's going on?" And they said, "It's over. They're gonna hide." And suddenly there was about 2 or 3 days that there was just chaos in the camp. Eventually it would be quarantined and shut down. But for a couple days, the gates were just open, and Joe said there was a sign tacked up saying, "You're free to go." And he was convinced that if they walked through that gate, he would be shot. But he said, "I was so sick, I didn't care. I was going to die anyway." And he simply, with the help of two buddies, walked out to freedom. And so while Joe's story is a tremendous story of heartache, he never knew when he was taken from his home that he would never again see another member of his family. He had no idea that he would never again return to Poland. He has never been back home. That's something you could keep in your prayers, because Joe is struggling with this decision. He would really like to go, and that he's also worried about going, as you can imagine. You could also keep in your prayers that we can find a photo of his family. Joe said he would give anything for one photo of his family. He says he can remember the faces of his brothers as clearly as if it were yesterday, but he can no longer remember his mother's face. So I just know there's a photo out there somewhere. So please, if you know anyone who can help us find us, let me know. That would be a tremendous gift we can give him. And Joe went on to live an extraordinary life afterwards. You'll have to find out more. We don't have a lot of time, but just briefly, immediately after the war, he didn't know where to go. He knew he couldn't go back to Poland. He didn't have a dime to his name. He was sick. He lost everything a human being can lose but his life. And the buddy next to him said, "I'm Jewish. I'm from Germany. I had a business before the war. I'm going back. And Joe, you should come back with me until you heal, until you know what else to do." And so of all places, Joe went to Germany after the war. And he's standing on a street corner one day, and a man taps him on the shoulder and says, "Is that a Polish accent?" And Joe said, "Yes." And the man said, "Well, I'm from Poland originally, although he had lived in Germany during the war." And they got to talking. He said, "Would you like to come to my home for dinner?" And Joe said, "Sure." And the man said, "And by the way, I have a beautiful daughter." Well, that beautiful daughter and Joe have now been married over 65 years, actually 68 years. And she is a German Catholic, married this Jewish man. And that's one of the brilliant things about Joe's story. He tells everyone, I don't care what religion you are. I don't care the color of your skin. We must love one another. And Joe lives that and breathes it with every aspect of his life, including who he married. And I think that's one of the things, the reason this story is touching so many lives. It doesn't matter if people are Jewish or Catholic or Protestant, or even atheists are telling me this is having an impact. And to me, that's another miracle of Joe's story. So he went on to New York. He had an extraordinary career. He became one of the leading shoe designers in New York, if not the world. And he's just an incredible, joy-filled man. He's 95 now. He looks like he's 75, acts like he's 75. He is incredible. And he just tells me to tell everyone, Nancy, life is precious. It's the most precious gift we have from God. We must love one another. We must love life. And we must love God. And he says that to tell me to tell everyone. And so on behalf of Joe, I'm telling you. So I'll stop there and see if you have any more questions. But well, we're going to have a brief video. One thing it's about 9 minutes long. And Joe's story is remarkable in another sense, in that just one thing after another happened to save his life, a little bit like Unbroken. One of those things, and he talks about it just briefly, was at one point the inmates were tattooed when they first got there. Joe said that he was brought back in later with a group of people, and they were being tattooed, most of them with the triangle, which was the sign for being Jewish. And for whatever reason, the man looking at Joe looked at him and said, "You know what? You don't look Jewish to me," whatever that means, and said, "I'm not giving you that sign." And he put on, instead of a triangle, he put on a V, which meant political prisoner. And that designation, the difference between a V and a triangle, was one line of ink. One stroke of ink saved Joe's life. They certainly knew Joe was Jewish. He wasn't a political prisoner. We have no idea how he got that designation, but all his documents say Jewish political prisoner. And because of that, he credits that to having saved his life. One line of ink.
Life is very precious, no, I love life, and I always did. So I did not give it up, no matter what condition I was. Usually they do it for the Jewish kid, they used to put the David star on. And the guy who did that, he said, I'm not crucifying you. So he put that V on me. I was blessed. You know, I'm still grateful. I'm still here, 93 years old. And I have a beautiful family, beautiful grandkids. And I worked all my life. I never was afraid of hard work. I was just a kid. Of course I'm scared. Who wouldn't be scared? Who wants to die? Everybody wants to live. Well, I tell you, when they took me away, I did not believe it. I thought they're gonna just ask me questions. I did not believe it they're gonna take me. No. That's when I opened the door, and I closed the door forever to see my folks again. I said that cannot happen. It will not happen. We didn't do nothing wrong. Why? That was my question. Why? On the train, you couldn't help each other. We just, you were so jammed in. It was so hot. We have no air. So it was hot enough in the train from the people. Every day. Every day. Lots of bodies. Thousands of them. There was big graves, big ones. And then they did grave by grave, and then they covered them. You could not survive. They knew that. I myself sometimes was thinking about it. The people didn't want to suffer. They know they're going to die. And they didn't want to die in that way, so they took their own lives. They went to the electric wire. That was the easiest way to die. Electrocute himself. But I didn't say no. No, I wanted to live. You call it day by day, living, day by day. You don't know if you're going to survive another night or another day. You figured you're next in line. When I was in camp, already I was thinking about it, what I'm going to do when I get out. I have to do something. I have the most terrible shoes in my life. Wooden clogs. And I got blisters all over, and I got to walk with them. I said, you want to kill me, kill me. I cannot go to work with those shoes. And he said to me, go in there and I tell you to give him other shoes. You happen to be a very nice kid. You should not suffer. And I went in and he gave the orders to give me other shoes. There was a general which was running the camp. He got the orders to kill every one of us. All of them. Then he said, no, I'm not going to do it. It was advertised. Then he opened the camps. Everybody's free to go. All doors. Anybody. And he told the soldiers not to touch us, to leave us go. The general, he was in charge. That was already probably what the Germans got beaten from all over. They didn't have no chance for survival anyway. But went into the stores, say where you can get your clothing. We didn't have to pay a nickel. They were so afraid. They said, anything you want to, take it. It's yours to take. We know what you've been through. Germans, they knew. As I'm a survivor, and I said, well, I'm the only one survivor from the rest of all of my family. And I have to fill out a form where I like to go, and I chose the United States.
When we arrived, when we got off the ship, I went down and I kissed the ground. And I said, thank God I'm in the United States. And I was so happy.
I wanted to be a fashion designer. I met some people and I told them as I design shoes, I'm a sketch designer in shoes. And the guy said, you know what? I have somebody who would love to have you. He gave me the address and I went to see him. I came to see him and I said, I don't speak English. You don't have to speak English. I don't speak English. This speaks for you. The sketches that you make. That is your ID. You don't have to speak English. Beth was the most famous designer with her sister in the world. And when she hired me, she said, I opened up another place they call 4N. And I want you to go over there and see what you can do in that place. I went over there. They couldn't even make 20 pairs a day, boots. And I came in. I said, everything has to be changed. You don't work this way. I said, you're not going to punch your clock and get paid for it. You got to work for it piece by piece. And I will teach you, every one of you, how to make more money and to help your family. That's the way I was all my life, helping people, believing people. That makes life more rewarding and live for it. Because you can still do things for yourself and for others. That makes you feel more excited and good. To give to somebody, a gift, help. That's the way I live in it. That's why I'm going to die by it.
So much, both of you, for your responses and for explaining the work on your books. I think that these presentations only strengthen our understanding that we can fathom the life of one person. We can understand one person when it's 6 million or even 358. It's a little bit more difficult to. One little item about Joe that Nancy and all that you mentioned you didn't say was that Joe had an identical twin. And I cannot imagine, this must have been so difficult for him to lose his other siblings as well, but his identical twin. So we're open now to questions. If you have any questions for either of the speakers, please. Yes, sir.
I have a question to Nancy. Nancy, you mentioned Nazi invasion of Poland, but it was a German invasion of Poland. And I admire, actually, you mentioning a few words in German, German soldiers, German life. Yes, I think that to call names by the right name, it was a German invasion to Poland. That's my comment.
This is a comment, not really a question. The comment is that mentioning the invasion of Poland, it was the German invasion, not the Nazi invasion of Poland. Did you want to comment on it?
No, thank you. I think that's an excellent point. You know, I wanted to say one more thing. I forgot to mention about Irene. I said that her father was Polish, and they lived in Germany during the war, but their time was also very difficult. Her only sibling, about the time the Nazis knocked on Joe's door, also knocked on their door in Germany, accused her only sibling of being a spy against the Nazis, took him out, and hung him.
I've got a question.
Yes.
What do each of you plan for the future? I know you're working on another book. Nancy, are you going to be working on another book?
So the question is, what will the authors be working on now in the future? Tony already has a book that he's working on, and Nancy, questions for both of you.
Well,
Come over here.
I tell you, I'm in the closing years of life. It's time to sum up. And I really think the survival of the Jewish people is phenomenal. That's the first thing. So having written this book, I now want to write something that's a little bit less distraught and less suffering in it. I'm writing now. In the last 2.5 months, I've written 160 pages. It's easy if you're 12 hours a day at it, like me. And I'm writing now about a true love story of World War I. A woman of 25 years old was sent from Kansas City to occupied France by the Red Cross, and she became director of entertainment because the wounded soldiers and the amputees needed medication and also laughter. And at the same time, a man left, he was 26 years old, left Brooklyn as lieutenant, and he was sent to occupied France. And he was very scared of being in the combat zone, terrified. And he was awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French for his bravery. I got letters from both of them from the Library of Congress. By sheer chance, I looked through 2,000 names before I found nurse. And then I asked for everything they had. It was one box, but there was 69 letters there. And then the family in Princeton and Wisconsin opened up to me, and they deluged me with documents. And I hope it'll come out before the Library of Congress has their exhibition on World War I planned for 2017. But their experiences are not only about the wards, the terrible facial wounds and things like that, his experiences of warfare. Twice in one day he was almost killed. Once, and he was in a trench, and a German soldier jumped over with a bayonet and tried to stab him. They literally had hand-to-hand combat before he plunged the bayonet in his enemy. And then he was in the same trench when the walls caved in and he was buried alive, almost. This telegram, a runner saw this, went back to headquarters and said he's dead. They sent a telegram to his father in Brooklyn, former state assemblyman, and they said, your son's dead. And he walked around for 2 hours wondering how he was going to tell his wife. And then he went back to the office and another cable came and said he's alive.
Wow.
He hadn't told his mother. So his experiences and her experiences. Now that's not the end of the story. They came back on the same ship and they met each other. There were 4,000 people there. And they met each other and they married. And her fiancé was waiting on shore, but he lost out. He lost out. And they married, and they had one child who became a world-famous physicist at Princeton, world-famous, died of leukemia. And his daughter and his second wife are the people who deluged me with information.
That's neat.
Well, that sounds like a more upbeat story of an awful war. I think that World War I was overshadowed by the horrible atrocities of World War II. And there's a lot that needs to be told still about World War I, so it's excellent that you're doing that. Nancy?
Thank you. I have another book, but it's long-term off before I even really start writing, because when I write, I can't do much of anything else. And I really feel like I owe it to Joe to do everything I can to get the word about this book out, because I feel like it is so important. And so I'm dedicating my time to speaking about Joe's story. So if you have any other contacts, please let me know around the world. I would love to speak there. And I'd love to see it as a movie someday, and a documentary. So there's a lot of things. We are in production right now for an audio book. And this was so cool. About 3 weeks ago, I was in Colorado with Joe. We took him into this recording studio. We were able to record Joe reading his opening quotes at the beginning of every chapter. So I think that will be really powerful as well. Because without a driving force behind somebody behind a book, they don't do much. So he's got a
Yes.
I was wondering if any of you have had a personal face-to-face confrontation with someone who is a known Holocaust denier, and what happened, or if it hasn't happened, what do you think might happen with
The question is about any interface with the Holocaust denier. So I know Nancy has a story about that, and perhaps Tony has, in addition to what he already said about the French neo-Nazi. Nancy, sorry.
Well, it was interesting. After we recorded Joe's voice for the audiobook, I posted it on Facebook what a neat experience that was. And some woman, not a Holocaust denier, but someone posted on my Facebook, my professional Facebook page, that, that woman, meaning me, was just making this all up, that Joe is really dead, that he's been dead a long time, that there's no such thing as a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz. And so I banned, I took that down from the site, and I just posted saying that anyone who denies the Holocaust happened or denies that Joe is anything but alive and well will not be permitted on the site, because to do otherwise would be a disservice and would be very awful for the memory of all those who lost their lives, including Joe's whole family. So I won't allow that. But it was kind of funny, because right after that, we were at a party with Joe. There was a going away party for my parents, who actually lived in the same neighborhood. And so we were able to record some fun video of saying, now, does Joe look dead to you? And he kept saying, no, I'm alive and I'm well. And he is.
I tell you, when this book came out, I wrote to the Southern Poverty Law Center and also the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and I said, I want to address Nazis. And I was serious about it. And they both said to me, don't. First of all, you won't get an invitation, and if you do, they'll be after you and your family. Now, I didn't mind if they came for me, because, as I said, I had a good life. But my family, I wasn't prepared for that, and so I dropped that. But I want to leave you with one subject. This is not about horror, it's about heritage. And the people who deny the Holocaust happened, they probably haven't opened a book before. They don't only live in the hills of Appalachia, but they're all over the place. And this really is a refutation of these people. The Jews have always survived, bequeathing a triumphant heritage of endurance. And the stories in my book testify to this everlasting resilience. I phoned a fellow in Switzerland just before his death last year, and he said to me, he was a survivor, if the Holocaust never happened, where is my family? And so the deniers are the people who really are the scum of the earth. They were not there. They haven't researched it. They haven't talked to the survivors. How can they possibly know what these people endured?
And I was going to say one more point to that. There are people right now that deny 9/11 ever happened. 100 years from now, can you imagine? There will be a lot of people denying that ever happened. People like to deny that evil exists. Evil does exist.
Unfortunately. Is there one more question? Anybody have another question? All right, well, the authors will remain around here if you'd like to speak with them. And again, Thank you very much for coming. And Gail, this was a very successful program. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.